Hi everyone, so today in this video I'm going to be showing you guys how I made these planets on my Instagram, and yeah, this is my first video. So in this video I'll also be talking about what I plan to do with this YouTube channel and the other videos that I plan to make in the future. So let's get started, I guess. So I'm going to break this video down in a few parts. So the first part is going to be talking about the planet, and then the atmosphere and everything like that. And then the second part is going to be the moon. And the last part will be the lighting and the background and stuff like that. So let's get started. Okay, so the planet. So the planet is basically made out of just a few spheres, as I will demonstrate right here. Okay, so the planet is made out of just a few spheres. So we've got our first sphere, and this is the core. A second one. And this one I decided to make a cloud layer, and then I have two others. One I call the inner atmosphere, and the fourth one I mean is the outer atmosphere. So like this. Now I already created my planet, so I don't need these four spheres. I'll just get the planet right over here. Okay, so here's my planet. Of course, as you can see, it's pretty hard to see actually. I have my first layer. My second layer, I'll actually show you here so you can see, yeah, my second layer, third layer, final layer. I'll just get them all back. So yeah, okay, so now I will show you guys how I did the planet core. So we're gonna start with the planet. Here we go. So I first added an hdri to the scene. So you just click on this yellow button over here and you add an environment texture, and then you can open your HDRI. Now I picked an HDRI from HDRI Haven, the Kira 2 Sunrise, I guess you can see there. And then I started shading the planet. Okay, so the planet is made out of a few different parts. I have the oceans, the land, and then I have the Arctic, so poles, the North Pole, and then the South Pole, which is right down here, if I can show it properly. Yeah, so I guess we'll start with just the continents and the oceans. So I started by using noise texture. So I used a noise texture for the continents. Of course, as you can see here, I have 3 different noise textures. This top one is the factor between the land, the continents, and the oceans. So I used a noise texture here and a noise texture here. The noise texture for the ocean and the continents is basically almost the same. Of course, as you can see, it's both 0.75, 0.75, except the noise texture factor is connected into the scale. And then I mix these two together using another noise texture. So basically this assigns, this basically says where there's going to be oceans. So wherever it's black, there'll be oceans, and wherever it is white, there'll be land. Of course, as you can see. And then to add the bump, I basically copied all of this and then used it as a bump node. Now this I'll talk about later, but this is basically the bump node of the continents. And then obviously also the ocean. So this separates the ocean and the continents, giving the continents a bit of bump and keeping the ocean a bit lower, which kind of gives it that more realistic feel. Okay, and then I mix this again, but that I'll talk about later. So now let's talk about the specular and roughness of the ocean and continents. It's here. So for that I just used a noise texture, another noise texture, and then I gave it a black and white value because specular and roughness are black and white values, so I just use a color ramp to convert the noise texture into a black and white value, because usually the noise texture has a bunch of different colors, and it's not, you can't see it that easily here, but yeah. So I used a color ramp also to make it a bit more clear where I wanted specular to be and where I wanted it to be a bit rough. So of course, as you can see that right here, right over here. And then a math value, and I set it to add. Usually you put it on multiply. I'll demonstrate it right here what happens if you put it on multiply. So if you put it on multiply, of course, as you can see, it's a lot more vivid. And it makes the blue look a lot more saturated and the green look a lot more saturated, because these are the parts where it's very rough, and the parts that aren't as saturated are the parts where there's a lot of specular, of course, as you can see over here and over here. And I didn't want that. I wanted it to be a bit smoother, so I used an add. Basically, the add is just adding the specular on top, which is what I wanted. And that's what gives it a kind of almost desaturated look, but I feel like that looks a lot more realistic than having it be extremely saturated. And then for the roughness, I just used the exact same thing. I copied it and plugged it into the roughness, so we kind of get a mix of the two. Okay, and now we'll talk about the poles. So for the poles, I actually came into texture paint. Of course, as you can see here, I painted on the poles. Now this one was a bit too big, so I painted it again and made it a bit smaller, and I did that on both sides. Of course, as you can see for both ones. Painted it on both sides. I saved the image to my desktop, and then I used it as an image texture that you can see right over here. Material.02 and over here poles planet. Okay, so then for the poles I used just the material base that I used as a color input and a factor input, of course, as you can see over here, and then I used a noise texture to give it a bit more detail. That's why it's set really high and has high roughness and high detail. And then I mixed this together with black, so basically this is another factor. So anywhere where it's black, we're going to see this, our continents and our oceans, and everywhere where it's white, we will see the poles, the kind of ice and snow. So, and then I created it, and then I created the color. So yeah, it'll have a blue, kind of icy blue color, and white for snow. And you can see over here, this is what we get. So for this, I actually used the other poles one, as I showed you over here when I came back to texture paint. I showed that I had two poles. I had this one, and then the material one. So this one is basically with all of the detail, because it was a bit too big. I decided to make another one, which I then later used as the factor, as you can see over here. So the factor, and then this is like the detail and the color. Okay. And then I mixed them together, so I used a mix node, and then I plugged our factor into our factor, so our poles factor into the factor, and I plugged the poles into the bottom one, and the continents and oceans into the top one. So basically everywhere where it's black, we'll see continents and oceans, and everywhere where it's white, we'll see this node network. Of course, as you can see, now we get this. And then for the bump, there's a little bit of bump that separates it from the water. Just come here. You can see that right over here. I think you can see it a bit clearer on the other side. I zoom in a bit. Yeah, right there you can see like a bit of bump that almost makes it look a bit more realistic, because it's a bit separated from the water and from the continents. It looks like a layer on top instead of blended in. So I just duplicated this part, and then I copied it and pasted it here, and I duplicated this again to use as a factor for the mix node. So basically I just copied everything that I did here, like all of this, and pasted it here and made it black and white. As you can see, I made this gray because I didn't want the difference to be that big. So the more black it is, the stronger of a difference you'll get. So of course, as you can see over here, we have a lot of difference, a lot of bump. whereas here it's a bit more subtle. And then I also don't have to change the strength on the bump node, because of course as you can see I have a strength of 1. And then I plugged it into the normal. So that's the Earth. So now the clouds. The clouds were, oh wait, no, this is the inner atmosphere, the cloud layer. This is what I'm going to do first. Yeah, so the clouds are a lot easier. Yeah, this is the cloud. So it's just a factor and a transmission. So it's not actually transmission. It's just a principal volume with no density, which makes it transparent, and a principal volume with quite a high density and a bit of a yellowy color. It's pretty subtle here, but you can see it really clearly on the clouds. And then I just mix those two together with this node network. Okay, so then I use this as a factor, a mix factor, with the black and this part over here where I used a noise texture, a Musgrave texture, and I mix those two together using the noise texture as a factor and as a just its own plugin, because you can see this is a noise texture. It still looks good, but it's not as detailed. And then this is a Musgrave texture, which has a lot of detail. Then I mix them together and I get like an in-between, so that I kind of get these softer clouds. Okay, and then when I was done with this, I used a color ramp to blend the black and whites a bit together. Of course, it's very subtle, but when you use it with the volumetrics, it does kind of make a bit of a difference. So I guess now you can see it here. Just plug this out. And now you can see it with the volumetrics. Of course, this is just a factor, and it's a principal volume with the no density and a principal volume with a bit of density and a bit of color mixed together. So now we'll move on to the inner atmosphere. So this is the inner atmosphere. You can see it right here. So the inner atmosphere is actually very simple. This I do not need. I can actually delete those. But the sphere, it's just a principal volume with a bit of color. As you can see, a very low density plugged into the volume. And the reason why I wanted this, I used this to kind of almost make it a bit darker without the inner atmosphere. It's quite bright. And with the inner atmosphere, it gives it almost a bit of thickness, a bit of density. And then I added the outer atmosphere, which is just a sphere. And this really pulls it all together, really ties it up. And you can see I used a layer weight for this. I actually saw a tutorial from hdri on how he made this really nice atmosphere. So I used a layer weight, a color ramp, a diffuse, a transparent, and then the mixture. So you mix the diffuse and the transparent together using the layer weight. So basically the white parts, so this whole area is going to be transparent, and then the outer areas is going to have like this diffuse color, of course, as you can see here, and then it's just going to fade off, and that's what this blend factor is for. And this really makes it look a lot better. Of course, as you can see, without it, it doesn't look as good as with it. So that was the Earth-like planet. So now let's move on to the moon. Okay, so the moon doesn't really have that much. It's pretty much just the core. Which you can see, it looks like a lot, but it's just a lot of things being copied. Of course, as you can see, this whole area is the exact same as this whole area, this bottom area. Because this is just the bump factor. This is like for the color of the moon. I actually had another sphere, as you can see over here, which I was planning on using as an atmosphere for the moon. But I didn't really think that the moon needed an atmosphere. So I just I wanted to keep it a bit simple. And I prefer this a lot more than adding all these layers. This is just fine. I wanted to show off all of the detail, and if I added the atmosphere, you wouldn't really be able to see that. We'll start at the top. So this is the Voronoi texture and the noise texture. So this one I used to kind of create those bigger bumps, as you can see over here. It's like really big. I'll come back here. these areas. It's kind of not necessarily, they're not indent, but they're like these kind of areas that pop out a bit more that have this light gray color. So I used this as a factor for the other Voronoi texture, which of course, as you can see, is this gray part. So basically everywhere where it's black, we'll see these gray areas. And then everywhere where it's white, we will see this. So I made this by using a noise texture as a factor. Of course, as you can see, this is a factor. So it's very subtle because there are not that many black and white. It's not that big of a difference between black and white, but it does add a bit. You can see this is the noise texture. It's pretty much the whole thing. It's just a bit of roughness, a very low scale, because if I up the scale, of course, as you can see, it gets too noisy. So 2.6 is what I used because that was good enough. And then it's got a bit of detail, because if you go above 16, if you go to 16, there's not that big of a difference. There's like barely any difference between 8 and 16, and you're just adding unnecessary detail. And then I gave it a roughness, and then I mixed it with the Voronoi texture. And the Voronoi texture I do to add those little bumps that you can see in an actual moon. I'll insert an image over here. And yeah, you can see in the actual moon, you can see all these like smaller circles. And then I use this. If I move this value, this dark gray value, you can see how much stronger it gets. So yeah, that's what that color ramp is for, and also to add color. And then I mix those two together with this noise texture. I mean, it doesn't really add that much. It doesn't really make that big of a difference, but of course, as you can see, parts like here, you can see the Voronoi texture a lot stronger than other areas like here. And that's what this noise texture does. This top one, the factor. And then over here, this is basically the bump is the exact same as this top area, but then with black and white values. And I removed some of these color stops because the color stops didn't really add that much. So for example here, let me see where I can show it well. For example here, you can see over here we've got four different kind of color stops, and here we only have 2. So because this just has to be in black and white, it doesn't need all of those different colors. Now of course, as you can see, there is a bit of gray, but that's just due to it being all mixed. But there's not really that much there are not really that many different colors needed like this one, different kind of grays needed, because of course, as you can see, this is what this one eventually looks like mixed, and this is what the bump map looks like when it's mixed. So you can see over here, there's like a pretty big difference on these big Voronoi balls. Like you can see over here, on those ones, there's a pretty big difference because this is just gray, whereas here it is black and gray. And then you can see that you get this. I left the specular and roughness where it was at because I thought that just looked fine. There wasn't really much change needed there. So yeah. Okay, and then the composition and the lighting. So for the composition, I like the moon coming from behind the planet. So what I did was, of course, as you can see, the planet and the moon are pretty far away because the moon has to look a bit smaller than the planet, and scale-wise, size-wise, they're almost the same size. Actually, I think the moon is just as big as the planet's core. So yeah, but from far away, it looks a lot smaller. So I kind of wanted to see the moon coming from behind the planet as if it was orbiting the planet, and you could just see it on time. So I came into my camera mode because I really wanted the camera to be close to the planet, and then just to show like a part of the planet because I didn't want it to show the whole planet, and then the moon coming from behind it. So it was kind of just style preference. Obviously, if you want, you can change it up. You can have the moon, so like we're all the way over here if you wanted. It doesn't really matter. But yeah. And then for the lighting, I only have 3 different lights. So I have 2 lights over here and a sun over here. So the sun is just mainly to light up the planet from a certain angle. So I wanted shadow over here and a lot of light coming from this side. So that's why the, if we go to top view, you can see that the sun is pointing to this point and our camera is around here. So what we'll see is we'll see shadow over here, and I'll see if I can draw it. So here we'll see shadow, whereas here we'll have light. Yay, sunshine. So here we'll have light, and here we'll have shadows, and you can see that really well. You can see that really well from the camera mode. And then for the moon, yeah, for the moon lighting, actually, I used 2 spotlights. So I have one spotlight that's a bit of a like bluish color, and the other spotlight is a bit of a reddish color. So we get this nice contrast between the red and the blue. Now, I think the spotlights might have shifted a bit, but they're supposed to be like that. Anyway, and then like that. Oh, and then for the background, now for the background I wanted to, at first I made it black, so I just came to the background. If I turn off this. So I came to the background and I made it completely black, as you can see over here. But I didn't really like that. I kind of wanted it to be more special in a way. I kind of wanted it to, I didn't want it to be so boring. So I found an HDRI online. It took quite a while to find a free space HDRI because there are not that many. But I found an HDRI of a crab nebula online, and I thought that one looked really good. So here I sharpened the image in Photoshop, and you can see here I have HDRI sharp, and that's that. So of course, as you can see over here, you can see we have the spotlight over here. I'll actually make it invisible so that's easier to see. We have the spotlight over here. It looks pretty white, but that's just because it's really bright. It's a 1 megawatt, so that's really, really bright. And then we've got our other spotlight coming over here, and this one's a lot less. It's 50,000 watts. So compared to the other one, that's 1 megawatt. That's 1 million watts. This one is a lot less, and that's why you see this just like a bit of a blue shade instead of like an extremely powerful blue light. Because if I also made this one 1 megawatt, if we make that one 1 megawatt too, you can see that you can see that now this one emits a white bluish light, and you can't see any details. So that's why I had it at 50,000. And I also think that it gives it this nice contrast with the white. I mean, it's supposed to be a bit of a reddish, but I guess with the white. And then we have our sun, and our sun has a strength of 20 because the sun's strength is always a lot more than a point spotter area strength, of course, as you can see. And because it's got this reddish color, we kind of get this, or not reddish, kind of yellowish color. It matches the atmosphere and the clouds. And that's it. That's how I made this space render. So, if you liked the video, don't forget to leave a like. In the next video, I'm actually also going to do another space video. You can see the post on my Instagram channel. And in that one, I'm going to be showing you how to create this kind of like a background like this. I mean, doesn't look the exact same. It's a lot more bright, but it's just going to be a simple way of creating a nebula. So subscribe if you want to see that, I guess. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked the video, and I hope you learned something. And yeah, if you make something like this or have any tips on how I can better the planets and the renders, then DM me on Instagram. My Instagram is @Natrezzo. I'll put the link in the description. And thank you for watching my video. Bye.